Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today I am reacting to yet another Vox Pop from Politics Joe, who were at the recent PopCon convention. For those of you that don't know, Liz Truss was the one who launched a new political movement in a bid to rally right-wing Tory MPs ahead of a general election, as she called on others to galvanise Britain's secret conservative forces. Popular conservatism, dubbed Popcom, is described as a new movement aiming to restore democratic accountability to Britain and deliver popular conservative policies. In other words, it's going to be something that generally left-wing people hate because it is quite clearly a mixture of populism and conservatism, both of which are things that they want to completely stamp out. And there are other people like Lee Anderson and Jacob Rees-Mogg there, and here was Politics Joe trying to do their best to effectively shame them for being there. So please take it away, Ed Campbell.
Lee, aren't you embarrassed to be here?
Eh?
You were in government, and now you're here. It's a bit of a fall from grace, isn't it?
I'm in government.
You were in government, you were a member of the government, and now you're here. It's a bit of a fall from grace.
I mean, this is the type of thing that random Twitter accounts would be saying on Twitter to Lee Anderson that he would just ignore. And the reason he sounds so confused as to the phrase, "I was in government," or "you were in government" towards you, is because Lee Anderson is still in government. He still has a seat in Parliament. He's just not in the cabinet anymore because he apparently didn't agree with the Rwanda bill, and then when it actually came to the vote, he simply abstained rather than actually voting against it. Because the Tory party's currently in a state of actually trying to find its identity. It's always been a relatively broad church, but there are times where one faction is clearly winning, and for the past 13 or so years, probably longer, you've had Cameron Blairites that have been in charge of the party, and you had a bit of a blip with Boris Johnson, who was making all these non-Blairite policies of leaving the EU, putting controls on immigration. I mean, I suppose they've all said they'd put controls on immigration, but you believed Boris Johnson. None of which obviously happened. You then get Liz Truss, that was effectively an economic time bomb, according to the media, though in reality she was simply a starting step in the direction away from modern economic orthodoxy, which is post-war consensus economics. And so because of this, you've got a big Red Wall faction who effectively are the hang-the-nonces, fund the NHS side of things. You've got the more economically liberal types like Liz Truss, who are effectively just social liberals. They have some streak of conservatism in them like Jacob Rees-Mogg, but are ultimately on my side of the fence when it comes to the economic side of things, but when it comes to social issues, it's unlikely they're going to push back too hard on gay marriage. Whether they agree with gay marriage or not is a different question. While in government at this point in time, they're not going to push against it, which, to be honest, I understand. And then, of course, you've got the third faction that are just the Cameron Blairites, the post-Keynesian economics plus, oh, isn't gay marriage the best thing the Tories have ever done? But back to the clip. Lee Anderson did the right thing by just ignoring Politics Joe, because they are effectively Twitter with an official logo behind them. I mean, it screams, "I'm not very good at journalism," when Carol Vorderman is singing your praises. Anyway, let's get back to the clips.
Nigel, aren't you embarrassed to be here?
Good morning, Mr. Farage. Mr. Farage, you waste of space.
Again, if this is your entire video and you named it Ed Campbell terrorising conservatives, I think twice about what your magazine is supposed to be representing, because you are literally just the real-life version of a muted reply guy on Twitter. This is actually pretty embarrassing.
Hey, this is a bit embarrassing, isn't it?
This is all these clips are, by the way. As they're going in, Ed Campbell asks, "Oh, you're embarrassed to be here, aren't you?" And they just ignore him. Again, just embarrassing.
Mr. Rees-Mogg, that was a bit embarrassing, wasn't it?
That was delightful. No, I think Steve is...
Sorry, I mean the conference, not Steve Bray.
Oh, the conference was marvellous.
I think, does the public really want to hear about wokeism, about communism?
The public is very interested in hearing these things. They're not particularly interested in lefty outfits, I don't think.
As much as there's many reasons to be disappointed by Jacob Rees-Mogg, I do appreciate the way he replies to journalists like this, which is just to answer the question seemingly honestly. It's probably very much diplomatically, but it is definitely true that wokeism is a growing concern for a great many people, especially of older generations, and very soon I can imagine it will be a popular issue with young men, especially young white men, because it appears that wokeism absolutely hates them, so why wouldn't they be concerned by it? And especially from the Tory members that I know, they are definitely in the mindset that Britain is effectively a semi-socialist country, so hearing that you're going to fight the communism or socialism within the blob or the government or wherever else in Britain, then yes, people will be happy to hear that. And Rees-Mogg is right. According to sales data, lefty outfits definitely make less revenue than the more right-wing rags of, say, the Daily Mail or even the Express. So Jacob Rees-Mogg is just right in all of this.
I disagree with you there, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Well, that doesn't particularly surprise me.
No.
You would professionally.
I do really like that last word from Mogg as well. Of course, you disagree that the public don't care about leftist rags, you work for one, is effectively what he said there. I can never come to hate Jacob Rees-Mogg myself. But anyway, that was the main thing that Politics Joe were trying to show around Twitter and YouTube, but I am here to react to yet another Vox Pop by Politics Joe. And I genuinely find it shocking that they didn't make this part of their Extreme Britain series of Vox Pops, because I would have thought if you were a leftist magazine, you would be saying the people that like Liz Truss are extreme because they think anyone to the right of Mao is extreme. But anyway, it's not technically reacting to Extreme Britain, hence the title, but it is effectively within that series of videos. So I say let's take a listen to the people who like Liz Truss, and I will give you my takes on it, because I also happen to be someone that thought Liz Truss was the best Prime Minister we had in the 21st century, and was absolutely shafted, as I'm sure we will get into. So, take it away, Politics Joe.
Liz Truss, aside from her time in office, her ideas still do have some salient.
No, stop it right there. Her plans in office were what she was saying outside of office. You need to push back on the idea that Liz Truss crashed the economy. She didn't. Because even articles that start off with the crisis caused by Liz Truss and seem to spread the lie of the £45 billion of tax cuts that she promised, which, by the way, it wasn't tax cuts, it was just, we're not going to raise taxes if we're elected. The only tax that was cut was the 45p rate for the highest earners, which was a trap put in by Gordon Brown, and was only making about £6 billion of public sector revenue. In other words, even articles that think the whole disaster was Liz Truss's ideas, when they go into LDIs, you realise none of this is to do with Liz Truss. So an LDI is a strategy which has been used by many pension funds to manage risk, and effectively are an investment that are supposed to pay for all current and future liabilities. And so when we actually take a look at what happened in September and October of 2022, we can see that the government bond yields increased by a large amount. Many corporate defined benefit pension schemes that invest in LDI funds had to provide their investment manager with collateral, and although schemes did have collateral plans in place, many struggled to provide collateral to their LDI manager quickly enough. And so the LDI funds cater for this and can reduce hedging if sufficient collateral is not received in time. And the problem in the case of the end of 2022 was that so many schemes and other investors were selling gilts, or government bonds in the UK, and therefore not many people wanted to buy gilts, with the expense of gilts going up. And this crisis was such a problem that now pension schemes are looking for alternatives rather than just putting everything into LDIs. Paul Wood, founder of CPAID, which is a solicitors that specialise in wills and therefore need to know a lot about pension schemes, said, "The crisis has underscored the necessity of maintaining a buffer, a reserve of sorts, to cushion against unforeseen market volatilities. Pension schemes are now more inclined to adopt strategies that allow for a degree of flexibility, facilitating a more dynamic response to market fluctuations. There is a growing recognition of the need to diversify investment portfolios to include a broader range of assets, including alternative investments that were previously considered too risky or unconventional. This shift is driven by a desire to hedge against the kind of risks that precipitated in the LDI crisis, creating a more resilient portfolio that can withstand the shocks in the future." So at this point, if you are on the uninitiated side of why Liz Truss basically didn't do anything wrong, you might be thinking, well, why didn't Liz Truss do anything to account for this LDI crisis? Because the Bank of England knew, but elected not to tell her or anyone in her government. As Liz Truss herself says, "I believe there were other factors apart from the mini-budget. The key thing we didn't know about was the LDI issue, the so-called liability-driven investments used by UK pension funds, which she says found out about only later. Some £1.6 trillion of assets were tied up in those funds, a staggering 60% of the GDP. Quite the domino to fall. A subsequent investigation found that the regulators had only stress-tested LDIs to a scenario where borrowing rates rose 1 percentage point over a short period of time. The day before her mini-budget, 10-year borrowing rates had risen to 3.5%, up from 2.5%, into the danger zone. No one in the Bank of England, Treasury or Number 10 had realised, so no one warned her. If we'd known that beforehand, Truss says, we certainly would have maybe moved the mini-budget or waited a few days to see what happened. And I honestly don't think that she is lying. There were no articles about LDIs before this issue, and even if the Bank of England did know about this, I don't think they will have told Liz Truss or Kwasi Kwarteng, because Liz Truss was quite openly against the Bank of England running as it does. The whole point of Liz Truss is that she went against the economic orthodoxy of the Bank of England. She was the change candidate when it came to economics. And absolutely everyone who is a fan of Liz Truss needs to understand this. They need to understand and make it clear in their heads, because to be honest, I have trouble remembering the whole details of LDIs and explaining to normies why it's not Liz Truss's fault that pensions are under threat. Because how in God's name do you not realise that 60% of your GDP in pension funds is under threat from effectively going back to market conditions? You can't cause that much turmoil by being in the government in 40 days and have it even be majority your fault. I mean, for God's sake, Argentina recently got Milei and he's completely changing the way the economy works over there, and there's nothing even close to that bad going on over there. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, hopefully I won't have to do another long tangent like that, and we can just go back to reacting to other fans of Truss.
She is a great political thinker and figure.
I mean, again, it's pretty unfortunate that people only really know her for the pork market speech, along with the "that is a disgrace because we get all our cheese from France," because that is her at her most charismatic. It is unfortunate that Liz Truss isn't very charismatic, but when it comes to the ideas that we need to move away from the current economic orthodoxy and there are issues culturally with leftism, that's all fine, that's all going in the right direction. Is it anywhere close to the ideal candidate for me? No, obviously not, but I'm realistic here. She's about as right-wing as we can get in the current Overton window in Parliament.
I think Sunak needs to go. I think he's a flop. There's going to be no change. We're destined for disaster.
Well, I pretty much agree with everything there. The most praise that I have given Rishi Sunak is that he is allowing for more exploratory licences to be put out for the North Sea, and he's given some lip service against net zero. Aside from that, I pretty much only have indifferent things to say about him or negative things to say about him. I mean, there was a very good reason that the Tory membership didn't want him in, and it's because we all knew that he was the continuity candidate, and the continuity was awful.
Did Liz Truss not try that last time?
She did, but the Bank of England worked against her.
More or less for the reasons of LDIs, like I said before, but you have got to bring up LDIs when you say things like that, and make it clear that Liz Truss has no sway over LDIs, and also was not informed about them by the Bank of England. Those two facts need to come out if you're going to say something like it, because it's just going to be lost on most people, and they're going to think you're mental.
Behind me, in that church there, disgraced former Prime Minister Liz Truss is launching popular conservatism.
Yeah, it's a little bit harsh, but she was only in there for 40 days, and the popular narrative is that it was her that completely destroyed the economy. So I can understand it, but I'd just be repeating myself if I went on about it.
While that might sound like a contradiction in terms, popular conservatism, or PopCon as people insist on calling it, is a project launched by Truss and her allies in order to bring back the ideas that Liz Truss was just in the middle of perfecting when the economy fell off a cliff.
I mean, I can understand why it's being called popular conservatism, because how can you not describe her as a popular conservative if she literally won the members' vote to be the next Tory leader? She is literally a popular conservative. I know you don't understand that because you're not a conservative, but she is actually very popular with the Tory member base, even after her time in office, because me and many other members understand that she was shafted. She absolutely was shafted, for the LDI's explanation I gave before.
Some nominally serious politicians are here, so desperate to try and save their seat, they'll attach their good name to the pet project of a woman whose net favourability is -54, rather than try and help their constituents get a dentist appointment or something.
I have no idea what he says at the end there, but I would like to know what Politics Joe think a respectable MP is, because I can just tell that they're going to say someone like Angela Rayner, who, again, basically I'm saying that the only people they'd say are respectable are people who have working class voices. Because that's all any leftist means when they say a respectable MP. Nothing to do with the content of things they say, the policies they strive on, just are they Labour and do they sound working class? And the irony of the clips at the start of "Aren't you embarrassed to be here" being juxtaposed with "look at these semi-respectable politicians" is just genius. I mean, either they're the funniest people on the planet, or they are that unself-aware.
There are a lot of right-wingers here. Tory MPs, Tory members, other ghouls. Aren't you embarrassed to be here?
Oh, good lord, they juxtaposed it themselves anyway. But it is quite funny to imply that this whole thing is actually quite unpopular when you literally have a man who came third in what is essentially a popularity contest throughout the UK. They're putting his name behind it. Like, obviously, I think it is quite fair to call this popular conservatism. And I mean, my God, I have no problem with calling MPs idiots, morons, or any riff on stupid, but calling them ghouls, I just don't think I could bring myself to say that. Even with relatively open anti-Semites, I just don't think I could call them ghouls. I'm fine calling them evil and stupid, but there's just something about using dehumanising language like that I just find a bit off. When it's in the context of something that is clearly supposed to be professional. If it's random off comments on Twitter, I don't really care about it. When it's literally, I've got a microphone and I'm going to be talking to you and I was going to go up to you for an interview, calling them ghouls is just wrong. There's no other way around it.
They're all here to find out what Liz Truss would do to fix the country. We're here to ask them why.
Well, I imagine most of them there would say, because I voted for her and then she was shafted by the Tory MPs and the Bank of England. At least that would be the way I'd put it.
Popular conservatism is an oxymoron at the moment, isn't it?
Somewhat, but I think the principles of the Conservative movement and the ideas and the priorities of Conservatives in the country remain pretty popular. I think it's the party which is somewhat tainted at the moment.
I would generally agree with that assessment to an extent. The problem is that you've got a whole generation of people, some Gen X and especially boomers and above, that have effectively lived through the best period of life on Earth, where they were lucky in that they were born in a Western country, made it through the 80s where frankly everything got better, university was free, the NHS was relatively well run, certainly better than it is in the modern day, and they managed to live through the benefits of a conservative Britain, while at the tail end of their lives they are effectively seeing Blairism ruin the country. So there's an awful lot of boomers that like to vote Tory because they want to keep that conservatism in. However, you then have a bunch of younger people, millennials, Zoomers and what have you. I mean, bear in mind, millennials are reaching 40 now and most of them still don't own a house. And so they think, oh, well, the Tories are only going to be good for these people, so they're obviously not going to be good for me because I have this massive amount of student debt, which they themselves got into, I can't save for a house, and all these other problems where the main response from boomers is simply, oh, stop buying avocado on toast and you'll save enough for it, while they were buying houses at about a fifth of the price at about half the age at this point, quite literally. And the problem is that the current Tory government, as we've had for the past 2 decades, basically everyone hates it. It's post-Keynesianism where effectively the government are directing about half of the economy and trying to also give out money to private businesses to try and get investment out there, and at the same time taxing people 25% and above, while also frankly importing a bunch of foreign workers to try and get them to work cheaply, and if they don't work cheaply, they work illegally for Deliveroo and Uber, and if they're not doing that, they are queuing up for an NHS dentist. And effectively, everyone has been gaslit to think that this is all right-wing and Tory policy, which is why when they hear Liz Truss and all these other people are to the right of that, they think, oh god, no, I want someone like Corbyn instead. Who, again, isn't very popular because, in reality, all of these alternatives are either harkening back to Thatcher if you're a right-wing Tory, or they're harkening back to Clement Attlee if you're a left-wing Labour supporter. And really, I think the way you're going to win politics now and in the future is effectively by coming up with an entirely different type of politics. But unfortunately, all our political thinkers are so mired in all this gaslighting and left-wing dross that we're just not coming up with anything useful anyway. So while I think this popcorn thing is a step in the right direction, simply because it's a step away from the left, I either think it's genuinely going to be popular with the electorate as a whole, but at the same time, probably quite popular with Tory voters because it is trying to hark back to Thatcherism.
Conservatives win the next election.
They can, with the right leader and the right policies, because what's happened at the moment is our voters are on strike. You know, they don't recognise, there's a poll that came out just recently, 90% of them, these are registered members, 3,000 registered members, don't think the government is conservative enough.
I mean, I'll take his word on the poll because via my own anecdotes anyway, that is true. But it's like my Twitter handle says at the moment, voter apathy is going to kill democracy, and the reason we have total voter apathy, well not total, but majority voter apathy is because the average person doesn't feel like politics is serving them. As I say, both the conservative boomer and the socialist millennial, they effectively want complete opposite sides of our current Overton window. The right wing probably wants it just outside, but all they have is this limp, flaccid Blairitism that we've had ever since 1997. And the institutions have been built up to the point where you can't have anything else. This is why we have a Supreme Court that's managing to thwart every attempt to deport foreign criminals, not just illegal aliens who crossed the channel, but people that have literally raped people and can't be deported. That's why Liz Truss was kicked out straight away, because she went off economic orthodoxy, and so the Bank of England effectively set a trap for her, and now any change to lower taxes and have less reliance on the public sector, boom, gone. Probably not going to see that for another 5 years or so. And then obviously Corbyn was kicked out because too many normal people are still within the Labour Party to want to vote for him. Hence you ended up with Boris Johnson having an absolute landslide, but then what did he do with it? Nothing, because, to be fair, from the other side of this, power has effectively been taken away from Parliament, either due to Parliament not having people with enough will to actually push these things through, via dirty tricks to be quite frank, and because they're not willing to take on Whitehall and the government establishment, because if they do, well, look what happens to Liz Truss. You have everyone working against you to try and kick you out of Parliament, and a lot of Tory MPs are on your side with that as well.
So is that the Conservative members don't think that?
Yeah,
they're not remotely representative of the wider public.
No. Well, the point is, we have lost our own membership at the moment, or Sunak has.
Well, Cameron did it first, thanks to gay marriage. It was something like over half of the Tory membership left the party over David Cameron's premiership, and ever since we've had David Cameron, pretty much every other Prime Minister has tried to replicate him in some way, apart from Liz Truss. At least on the economic side of things. When it came to immigration, yes, she was still for liberalising some visa applications. However, I imagine Liz Truss would be more on the side of Suella Braverman trying to get the deportations through the courts, rather than Rishi Sunak, who effectively did nothing to try and help her, and obviously she quit after that, blaming him for the mess that we're in when it comes to illegal migration. And this is why a lot of Tory members are flocking around Liz Truss, because she represents the rebellion within the Tory party, and therefore the rebellion against government, which is what we all want.
So who do you think you should be appealing to?
Well, I think we've got a lot of people who are annoyed at what's happened over 11 years. They're frustrated at what has and hasn't been done.
Yep, sure, got no issues with anything he's just said there. As I say, the successive Tory governments over the past few years have managed to just collapse their membership. It's no particular wonder that Reform are probably going to start outperforming Tories in the polls soon, because they're just trying to reignite a Cameron era, which in terms of culture was as liberal as it gets, more liberal than any Labour government that I can think of. And economically, everyone just thinks that it was austerity, and, well, given that one half of the austerity equation is reduced spending, I don't think it's fair to call something austerity if public spending only ever goes up. Again, a huge problem that the right wing have in this country is effectively trying to tell the entirety of the public that they have just been gaslit for the last few decades.
I think people who are going to Labour are going to them because they're more annoyed at us, and they think that Labour is the safe option. I think they're not quite persuaded of that, and I think as we come into the election, more and more people will decide that Labour is too much of a risk.
Again, this is a man who is basing everything off polling data. The issue with polling data is that all it shows you is percentages, and that's just of people who picked a party. For those that wish to abstain, it's not taken into account. So what's more likely happening is either people are deciding, no, I'm not going to vote for anyone, or they're deciding to go and vote for Reform. It's a lot more accurate to say that a lot of Tory voters are going over to Reform, even if they're Red Wall voters. Because when it comes to the issues that they have, I have no idea why they would vote for a continuity candidate to go even more left-wing than the Tories have done. There's a big reason a lot of people voted for Boris Johnson. It's because he seemed like he was a move to the right. Now, he turned out not to be, and this is why a lot of people have trust issues with the Tories now.
I mean, we're facing elections in London, so for that is we really need to tackle law and order.
Well, that's probably still in the top 5, but let's be real here. The issues everyone wants sorting first are poor economic performances for Britain lately, and no, Ramonas, that is not down to leaving the EU. Immigration, which I guess you could argue comes under law and order. And I believe health is another one that comes in the top 3, which is quite annoying because all that typically means is I want to see less news about NHS waiting time lists. But the problem is that the people of Britain are very silly and keep voting for an NHS policy that doesn't get those outcomes. But anyway, that is one thing that I don't think you're ever going to gaslight the British public on, at least not for my lifetime.
For the government, I think that we've got to get growth in the economy, and we achieve that by lowering taxes.
Yeah, again, I mean, nothing wrong with what she said there. You will typically see people spend more money when they have more money, and they will have more money when they are being taxed less.
The IMF has explicitly said not to lower taxes.
I don't always trust the IMF's view.
See, she laughs and struggles, but really what you have to do here is say, yeah, the IMF is the exact type of plan that Rishi Sunak is following at the moment, and it's not helping things. In short, you've got to be a bit more specific with these claims. Don't just say, I don't trust the IMF, because people will say, oh, conspiracy theorists. You've got to say, you know, make your point well in advance that the IMF get things wrong all the time. By saying, well, we're following the IMF's suggestions now, and nothing's getting better. That's all you have to say.
I'm sorry, there's a lot of politics being played there, and they don't like low-tax economies. They don't like to be shown up for their socialist model being undermined.
This is another thing that people in these vox pops need to start doing. Don't call what we're currently in socialist. The left-wingers, especially millennials and zoomers, think you're just memeing and will say, oh, when the government does anything, it's socialism. No. Which I guess is technically true. But you need to use the word post-Keynesianism, or even Keynesianism will do. Because one, it's harder to meme, and two, they don't know what that is. And so when they ask you for what does that mean, you can effectively say it's a government-driven economy that is effectively keeping the corporations in their entrenched position. And the corporations like it because they can lobby these Keynesian governments to keep taxes high on newer companies and smaller businesses so that they can't compete with them. And the governments, of course, like it because of the donations. Again, this is also quite similar to a fascistic economy, but I wouldn't even say that, because that, again, is a word that leftists associate with capitalism anyway, so there's no point trying to make them understand what all these terms actually mean. You may as well use one that isn't used very often and say, this is what we're in now. I agree with you, this is bad, because I don't like corporatism, and I don't like the governments being in bed with corporations, therefore we need something to change. And as long as you can say, I want the current status quo to change, that's fine, but the problem is that this isn't going to get across to people in politics, Joe. Because these are the type of people that think that the Tories are effectively Nazis.
But it is a proven fact that if you reduce taxes, that the economy grows, and I think that's what we have to do.
Generally, that, again, is only true in times of inflation. In times of deflation, if you lower taxes, what is going to end up happening is that people won't spend as frivolously, and they'll try and save as much as possible, because their money's just getting more and more valuable. But the thing is that when you look in times past, say the Victorian era, where we effectively had the most free market we've ever had, people still spent frivolously even in times of deflation. Obviously it probably won't be as much as in times of inflation, but this is exactly how economies are supposed to work. This is the whole theory behind it. You have these boom and bust cycles, and the whole idea of it is that you get to a point where things are moving towards where the market seems to want to go, and there's either a big change in the way people think, or these corporations get too big for their boots, and then eventually they collapse by different entrepreneurs who are making similar and competitive goods and services that are simply outperforming them. That's how a good economy keeps going, and obviously when a big corporation collapses, you can call it a bust, but really it's a time of chaos for a ladder for other smaller businesses. And it's a question I always put out to people. I mean, to be fair, not many people know of the Victorian period in Britain beyond there were chimney sweeps who were 2 years old. But really, can you actually name a single monopoly in the time of the Victorian period? And even I've just Googled Victorian Britain monopolies and basically nothing comes up. Most of the monopolies were with natural monopolies anyway, you know, the railways, the canals, gas and water, what have you. And while the government allowed them access to the areas of land they needed for the railways, canals and what have you, they didn't actually regulate the prices, and yet there is barely any writing at the time of a cost of living crisis, even similar to housing. That's not to say living standards were better, but that is to say that at this time in Britain, the quality of life was just improving, literally because of a hands-off approach. And that is simply probably due to the threat of these monopolies can fail and another will replace them. So there is still the incentive to actually make an efficient and price-effective product that people actually want to pay money for.
Did Liz Truss not try that last time?
She did, but the Bank of England worked against her.
We've already gone through that, but another point that, now that I know the context is talking about lowering taxes, no, don't say yes, she lowered taxes. She was going to cut a tax that Gordon Brown put in that only brings in about £6 billion a year, that affects, yes, the highest income, but overall obviously isn't there to actually make revenue. It is literally there set as a trap so that the media could do exactly what they did, which was to say the Tories are just trying to pay off their rich friends with a tax cut. The rest of the time, as I said, it was simply, we're not going to raise your taxes like Sunak is planning to do.
What made you join the Conservative Party?
Well, I'm a Conservative on a lot of issues. You know, I'm very much free market. I like low taxes. You know, my kind of ethos is work hard and get you somewhere in life, as long as you provide people with the opportunities to work hard as well.
Good lad, but once again, I'm Conservative on a lot of issues. I want a free market. No, we really need people to understand that Conservatism is literally rolling back the clocks culturally to before Tony Blair. I have high doubts, especially to be fair to him. There's no way he's going to say this to Politics Joe, but I still have doubts that he is against gay marriage because, you know, as I always say, Zoomers don't have a chance. It's all we've really known. I'm one of the older ones, and I believe at the time it happened when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, something like that. I still remember it being quite a big debate in the school I went to then, and I went to a Catholic school. So you got way more traditionalist opinions than you would have in, I imagine, a non-Catholic school. But even I can remember then, not via the teachers, but by my peers, that I kind of went to not really minding gay marriage as much, but then post-university I've kind of read up a bit more on all this philosophy, and now I am against it. So the point of all this is what I'm saying is that young Tories effectively just want a free market. I think culturally they just want people to hate men less, and I think because of that they're not really going to talk about gay marriage or abortion. Unless they're Tom Harwood, who for some reason will not stop going onto the trans radical activist side.
You wouldn't have paid taxes yet, will you?
I have not personally paid taxes, no. I have a job, but I haven't earned enough to pay taxes yet. Yeah.
Technically not true, he will have been paying VAT all his life. But typically when people say, oh, you don't pay taxes, do you? What they mean is that you're not earning enough to pay income tax. That's all people mean by, are you paying taxes? The reality of the situation is that every time money moves about, in some way you are paying taxes. We have that many tax laws in the UK.
It's because my family don't necessarily come from anywhere, you know, privileged by any means necessarily. I mean, my grandparents are immigrants and they work hard all their lives, and you know they've had enough to settle down. And I think it's important that a lot of people have the opportunity to do that.
I mean, I do agree, and I think this is part of the reason that I come from. I mean, my parents especially are relatively right-wing when it comes to things like this. Both my grandparents were without a doubt working class, and my mum and dad especially have only known to earn their own money, and my god do they hate people on benefits, especially when it's clear they're only on benefits because they don't want to earn their own living. So I can understand why this particular guy is going on the Tory side, but then I also have family members who go quite the other direction, and you know, I have an aunt who's now going to vote Green simply because a Green councillor knocked on a door and basically said, "Oh, I hate Boris Johnson, don't you?" Because really, politics is all just about vibes. I mean, I love talking philosophy and going deeper than things like this, but really, you just have to try and get to the lizard part of people's brains, and that's how you convince them, by making them get on board with your side of politics using the lizard part of their brain, the part that just reacts emotionally to things around them. And this is why Boris was so unpopular, because everyone saw, he's breaking the rules, which I could go into details of all that, of why he got stitched up by that as well, but I won't bother. But the point is that, oh, I couldn't see my own grandchildren, Boris Johnson was having drinks with his friends, I hate him. And that can make people vote Green.
And I think that they provided with that chance in life. And I think if you do work hard, it is important that you reap the rewards that you deserve.
Perfectly fine philosophy there. I am completely on board with you, and I would say, generally in Britain, you are probably being under-rewarded. At least we can say that when we compare ourselves to other economies in the G7. It's something I always say to people. If a lot of my friends don't really have the absolutely insane love for Britain that I do, and whenever they say they're thinking of moving abroad, I just say, well, if you don't love the country the way I do, I would say go for it. Because it's obviously the right economic choice for you, and clearly you think you're an anywhere person, and that's absolutely fine. So yes, I would like the economy to get to the point where actually working hard and making good choices does fairly compensate you. I mean, again, I don't want to be in a position, like I've mentioned a few times before, where I had to work 60-hour weeks for a wage that was below $20,000 a year just to get my foot on an entry-level job.
Number one, get our own voters back. Number two, take on Starmer.
To be fair here, if you can get most of your voters back on board, you will have already been smashing Starmer, so I wouldn't worry about that.
But we can do that. I think Sunak needs to go. I think he's a flop. There's going to be no change. We're destined for disaster.
I mean, like I said at the beginning, yes, it's all true. The Tory members did not want him, and since we've had him, it's just been a nosedive. He went up a bit post-Liz Truss, but I think that was because swing voters saying, oh, Liz ruined the economy, at least Rishi's a safe pair of hands. But literally nothing has improved after listening to the IMF, and now everyone's fed up.
If we stay with Sunak.
But then is that not even more embarrassing for the Conservatives if they changed another leader before the election?
I don't think so, because actually it's the Conservatives we need to appeal to. They're the missing voters, the striking voters. So if we appeal to them and reassure them, they'll come back to us.
I can understand the logic there, but I think that's too short-termism. I don't think it's going to affect the polls very well. I think basically the best thing to do is put Britain's hand on the stove, if that makes sense, and then work as an opposition party, because that will give you a much better idea of what your identity should be as a party. And I don't see why that wouldn't improve things, because again, Labour are only going to get in because no one wants to vote for the Tory party. And inevitably they are going to be worse than the current Tory party. So this is the unfortunate situation that we have ended up in. Again, it's a effective carbon copy of the 1970s before Margaret Thatcher got in. And you're guaranteed a decade of baseness of back then. So I don't know why we wouldn't have the same thing now.
A party which wants to go into government after having, 14 years of preparing now on a very light policy platform. I don't think it's going to wash when it comes to the election. I think we've got a very positive story to tell. Of course, it's not a perfect story to tell, but we've got a very positive story to tell.
I don't think anyone could give you a story that the Tories are trying to tell us. I think it's a similar situation for Starmer, by the way. This is why voter apathy is going to be the winner of the next election. But it is just clearly the case that the Tory party aren't going to fully back any Prime Minister while they are in power, because all of them are effectively drunk on the fact that they've all been in power for a decade or so. And there's quite a few that are stepping back now because they know they're going to lose their seats anyway. But technically I think that's actually a good thing. That allows for fresh blood to come in. People with an appetite to do well in politics. So it could be a blessing in disguise. But my God, if you think that the Tories have a coherent story at all at this point in time, I don't know what to tell you. You're just wrong.
Surely you're not going to get the best ideas or the best inspiration from the most unpopular Conservative politician in the country, Liz Truss.
Not that I'm comparing Liz Truss to Jesus, but Jesus' followers numbered anywhere from 12 people to 500 people at the very start of Christianity, and I mean, look how popular that got, and obviously how correct it is, at least in my opinion. Point being is that just because someone's unpopular doesn't mean they're wrong.
I think that Liz Truss, aside from her time in office, her ideas still do have some salience. I think the
Come on.
Yeah, if you're going to make a point like this, as I say, you have to be absolutely ready with all your facts. Even the main thing of just saying, well, this was just a walk in the other direction of where we were heading, which was to even higher taxes and public spending. You can just say that to explain that her ideas have salience, because you could technically make the argument that maybe you have to do it all at once than just doing it a little tiny step at a time, because I don't even count this as a step in the right direction. I count it as literally just stopping from carrying on in the direction we're going in.
The problem with the Truss government...
They were shown to be undone by the polling and the markets.
In the manner in which it was conducted and executed, which of course was appalling. But I nonetheless believe...
So what would be different?
I nonetheless believe that she is offering ideas which should be listened to, and of course I'll judge them on the merits of them.
I'd probably say this is the absolute worst way you could answer this question. Don't say the execution was bad. That's the wrong way to go about it. The execution was bad. I don't actually disagree. The problem is that what that implies is that Liz Truss knew what she was doing. Liz Truss had all the facts. No, what you have to bring to the front of your argument is that Liz Truss was not given the full scale of problems that could happen with her mini-budget. Because no one told her about LDIs. No one even knew before Liz Truss what an LDI was. Even from economists that I listen to, who actually quite easily predicted the inflation crisis that we ran into. They barely talked about LDIs before the Liz Truss administration. And so if it's an issue that basically no one's talking about, and the people who are supposed to be experts in this field don't warn you that actually 60% of our GDP is in these LDIs to pay for pensions, and shaking the foundations of our economy a bit is probably going to make that worse, as she says, she probably wouldn't have put in the budget. But she didn't know about that and got the entire blame for it, despite the fact that there's only so much you can do to the entire economy of Britain in 40 days without actually implementing anything. In other words, we were always going to have a problem. Liz Truss amplified it by maybe 5%. You have to get that point out. You have to put all the blame on the Bank of England and public sector pensions. Blaming Liz Truss is just completely stupid, but even her defenders aren't very good at it. And don't get me wrong, I understand why. It's a complicated issue, but it's something you have to get to the front rather than, Liz Truss just didn't execute it very well. Yes, but you have to say that she didn't execute it well because she wasn't given the facts by the Bank of England.
I suppose that's fair enough. We shouldn't reject the ideas out of hand without hearing them.
Wokeism seems to be on the curriculum.
Well, I genuinely didn't think they were going to bring what Liz Truss said in her speech into this, but screw it, let's react to it. That is simply true. Wokeism, in other words, intersectionality, undoubtedly is on the curriculum. Or at the very least is being taught in quite a lot of schools. As Professor Eric Kaufman says, as many as 59% of British school children are encountering critical race theory-derived terms such as white privilege, unconscious bias, or systemic racism at school. Adding two critical gender concepts such as patriarchy and the idea that there are innumerable genders, and the share of school children exposed to critical social justice linked ideas rises to 73%. Because if you watch my channel you probably already agree with this, but all of that is nonsense, and should be in schools the same way that things like the Soviet Union's ideas for government are, in that they are just there to be critiqued because they are obvious nonsense.
We've got more than 500 quangos in Britain. People want to see lower legal immigration.
I mean, I don't know if they put that first clip in to say, oh, she's making up terms, but a quango is an actual thing. A quango is an organisation to which a government has devolved power. In other words, there are over 500 government organisations in the UK alone, and obviously her point is that we don't want that many. And when it comes to legal immigration, I mean, it's just night and day. Even on the YouGov polls, when it comes to mostly good versus mostly bad for the country, as you can see, it's 38% mostly bad for the country, 21% mostly good for the country. Majority of people think that immigration in the past 10 years has been bad. By inference, we can say that most of them don't want as much as we are getting.
Conservatives have not taken on the left-wing extremists. They don't admit they're socialists or communists anymore. They say they're environmentalists. They say that they're in favour of helping people across all communities. They are in favour of supporting LGBT people or groups of ethnic minorities.
As I will always say with Liz Truss, it is her charisma that is probably her biggest downfall. All of that is true. Unfortunately, it's really easy to clip that and basically just try and say the classic left-wing thing of, oh, just being nice makes you a left-wing extremist. But given I've been doing this channel for 5 years, I understand exactly what she means. Trying to tell normies exactly what she means and what is going on is very difficult, and that was not the way to do it. Yes, all of these people will probably be postmodern neo-Marxists. There will be nihilists who effectively tell you that nothing really matters, but then when you say things like George Floyd was a criminal and point out the suffragettes actually weren't that great, apparently all of a sudden these things matter. You need to find a better way of effectively saying that all people involved in these groups are effectively postmodern neo-Marxists without saying it, because saying all of them are like that isn't a good way to go about it, because it makes you too big a target for the current media landscape, we'll call it. Though effectively all politics Joe is doing here is just showing you clips of Liz Truss and implying that they're all remarkably stupid things to say when actually they're all relatively decent and on topic for the problems in the UK that we are seeing.
Conservative cabinet ministers have met Greta Thunberg and asked her what she wanted. I never get invited to any London dinner parties, so it's not an issue. It's not an issue for me. I feel some invitations coming on after that.
I mean, again, the whole point of this segment is listen to the stupid things we're saying. I don't see the issue with saying our cabinet ministers meeting Greta Thunberg to ask her, what do you want, is a stupid thing to say. I think that's a relatively good question to ask, because why this particular 16-year-old girl? I mean, obviously she's 20 now, but still. Skipping school for a couple of days should not make you an international celebrity like it did for Greta Thunberg, but then you find out both her parents are in show business, and then it makes sense as to why out of every 16-year-old child that was an environmentalist, they chose Greta Thunberg. It's because she had an in. And I can absolutely believe Liz Truss does not get invited to London dinner parties, or at least many, especially by these left-wing lunatics.
Keir Starmer would enhance the power of these so-called independent bodies. He'd enhance the power of these quangos. He'd outsource more decision-making to his friends in Islington, which is where a lot of them live.
Is that not a fair statement to make? I thought it was the left-wing that were constantly going on about lobbyists and unelected officials. This is everything you agree with. Liz Truss wants less unelected officials and more power to Parliament, or at least the House of Commons, where people are actually voted in. I don't understand why you've put this in with the rest of your, oh, isn't what she's saying stupid type thing. This is literally the type of thing that you complain about all the time. But, oh, I guess it's Labour doing it, so it's okay.
If you ask the under-30s what they think of democracy, there's not a very polite response.
Now, obviously, that clip's taken out of context, but I assume the context of that is when it comes to, say, leaving the EU. A lot of these people were saying, oh, there should never have been a vote for people. Oh, we should have taken the voting rights away from older people. They voted in Tories for years upon years upon years. No, it needs to change. If they were honest with themselves, they do just want a dictator, but they have to look good, and so they want all these citizens' assemblies, which, when you actually read the, say, Extinction Rebellion handbook, effectively what they want is very local socialism that goes into the direction of wherever people vote, but they never really go beyond thinking about it like that. To which my biggest critique of it is, what do you do when you run out of money? And if they don't accept that, you then say, well, what if they vote to not want any of the policies that you want? And effectively, that's when they start saying that they want limits on these sorts of things, which goes completely against the idea they had in the first place. But anyway, that's the end of the Liz Truss segment, so let's go back to the Vox Pop.
Liz Truss mentioned in her speech the actions of she called them communists and socialists, and she railed against wokeism. Do you think that's the priority of the country?
Yes, I think we can fairly say that pretty much all problems in the country are down to these postmodern neo-Marxists, these intersectionalists, whatever you want to call them. But it is quite funny because I think he's going to try and imply that these people don't really exist, despite literally working for one of their magazines.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what she means by that is that we're not being able to grow the economy, and
that's not what she meant by wokeism, surely.
I think part of it is. I think part of the massive inefficiencies we're having, especially the public sector, can be in some part blamed on the fact that we need all this diversity and inclusion nonsense in there. I mean, you look at how much diversity officers are paid in the NHS, it's kind of like, oh, no wonder it's going under. But this is the problem. The wokeism means different things to different people, really. That's why I'm very, very much making it clear that it's intersectionalists that I'm going on about. Whereas when it comes to your classic Marxists, well, let's just be frank, they're not particularly popular anymore. Corbyn was the absolute proof of that, which is why they've had to go more down the Fabian route and less of the economic route, because they completely lost with all of Marx's predictions in the future, and now they have to say, oh, but look, black people are oppressed, oh, the gays are oppressed, things like that. And that's what wokeism means, but obviously this woman is very economically minded, and, well, that can only get you so far, unfortunately. Hence, I'm not really a libertarian anymore.
Yeah, a lot of organisations, including councils, are having their time taken up on woke things, and we're not actually concentrating on making energy prices cheaper, food prices cheaper.
Is that not due to the actions of the government?
I mean, before she answers that wasn't a bad recovery for the point she was trying to make. Because it is true, a lot of councils are spending their money on things like pride parades and things like that, whereas at the same time they're getting sued for not having equal pay bands, quote unquote, and therefore they've lost all their money. And some even had to start putting down Christmas lights literally because they couldn't afford it. And I'm not being funny, that all comes down to the Equality Act, that they're all being sued. Get rid of that, you don't have an absolutely ridiculous economy.
In some cases, yes, but in some cases, not. But, that is a lot of it. The energy prices due to net zero.
I see environmentalism as less for woke subjects, but I suppose if they're all just postmodern neo-Marxists, again, from what I've read from these environmentalists, that's just what they are, so I suppose I shouldn't have a problem calling it woke, but then I get worried about making the term too broad. But yes, I hope she goes into how all of our green subsidies on net zero pledges, even though we've literally halved our emissions from peak, we are still seen as a failure, and what have we got to gain from that? The answer is maybe about 5 people who know about this in Britain are actually celebrating
Which is we've managed to achieve more by actually improving the way that we provide energy than we have actually by legislation.
I mean, she's screwing up the argument here. What I would say is you would not be having a cost of living crisis when it comes to energy bills if we built nuclear power stations in advance, but we had people like Nick Clegg saying, oh, it takes 12 years, let's not bother with that. Which is the equivalent of saying, what's the point in planting crops? You're not going to be able to eat them for about 8 months. It just doesn't make sense. And also, I'd go on about the 75% windfall tax. Why aren't we getting investment in the UK? Because 75% or 2/3 of the profit you make as an energy company goes straight to the government. This is all things that the Green Lobby have wanted. When it comes to kind of woke issues, since we're including them, I'd say actually it's the Green Lobby that are the worst, because that's directly affecting people's lives and ability to stay afloat. But again, when it comes to vox pops like this, I can understand why you wouldn't be ready for answers like this. So again, 4 out of 10 performance, not great, not terrible.
Should we take Liz Truss seriously?
Absolutely. She is a great political thinker and figure.
I'll say it again, when it came to the clips of the speech that we were given, I agreed with pretty much everything she said. Again, it's just a problem of charisma and wording the arguments in the right way. I don't think she does that too greatly. But alas, she's the best we've got for now, as I say. Hand on the stove under Labour for 5 years. Hopefully we'll get someone better who needs to rise up in the ranks.
Conservatives really do need some serious reflection if they are going to have any chance in the next election. There is a total vacuum of policy innovation in the government. So is it any wonder Tory MPs and right-wing talking heads flock to events like this? Admittedly, they should realise they're not going to win the election talking about the deep state and Islington, but it's something.
I do agree to this to an extent. I think they're actually right that that's the problem. I just don't think it's going to sell any votes. Because it's a very, very Westminster bubble thing to go on about, which is obviously this is where all the power plays happen. So that makes sense to talk about it if you're within that bubble, but outside it, people are just saying, oh, my kids are learning about gay sex at school at the age of 5. My energy prices keep going up and I notice that energy companies aren't as willing to invest as they used to be. My wages don't seem to be rising as much as I'd want them to. I'd rather move to Australia, and the NHS is garbage. And really, you've got to directly address these things. Don't just say, blame Whitehall. If you're a politician, you need to be more direct and say, this is how we'll fix the NHS. In funding terms, it should be doing pretty well compared to other countries. Clearly that means we need systemic reform. Don't say you're privatising it for God's sake, but in reality do that. When it comes to energy bills, just say, look, we're subsidising all these things, and in some ways they're helping, say, offshore wind actually genuinely does help somewhat. But so we're going to make it incredibly attractive to actually have investors within the UK and without to fund our nuclear power stations by not taxing the bejesus out of them if they manage to make a profit from it. And then obviously make it clear that your kids won't be learning about sex until they're 11 or 12, because that seems to a lot of people to be reasonable. Obviously, in my mind, it should be 16 as above, but as soon as we start winning these battles, we can start pushing with the momentum to get it to that point. But right now, you have to really address these claims directly and these problems directly. Don't just start blaming other people, because people haven't quite realised that it's the civil service that's truly in charge of the country and not Parliament. Because again, people base all their politics on vibes. What feels good to my lizard brain? Saying the deep state and the blob might be true, doesn't really activate the almonds of the old normies.
You know, you look at what Rishi Sunak's doing. His last conference speech was meant to be the big reset, the big look at me, this is our message to the electorate. And what did we get? We got maths reform, we got banning on smoking, and we got the abolition of HS2. Now that does not make a winning manifesto.
Now HS2, I don't know if I necessarily agree or not. It feels very 50-50 when it comes to that argument, but on the others, I think he's right. A lot of people seem to like banning vapes for some reason. Everyone just lost their absolute rags when it came to banning them. I don't know why, but while people seem to like it, it wasn't really a vote winner. You know, people aren't going around saying, I wish kids would vape less. And to be fair, quite a lot of people seem to think that the smoking ban, like they were trying to do in New Zealand, we were going to emulate it under Sunak. And already New Zealand's thought, no, let's not do that, it's ridiculous. And inevitably the same thing will happen here, so what was the point? And finally, again, making everyone do maths up until the age of 18, I don't see the point. I will absolutely admit that when it comes to understanding of mathematics in the UK, it does seem to be worse than a lot of other countries, and it is a very useful skill to have. But forcing people to still do it until they're 18 isn't going to make people ingrain it in their own brains anymore. Effectively, it was a load of non-issues he went after. And as this guy says, why would anyone care?
Whilst they're notionally trying to be helpful here, what they're really doing is doing a big, highlight under the fact that the Tory government is not really offering much for voters as far as they see.
Yeah, that's certainly the issue I'm having at the moment. I keep having people say to me, oh, just vote Tory, Labour will be worse. Yeah, I agree, but I can't just keep doing the same thing every election and expecting a different outcome. I have to do something different. I'm not insane. They had their chance with Boris Johnson and they literally just went back to Cameronism. What was the point?
Do you think the answer then is with Liz Truss? Surely there's a better option than a failed former Prime Minister who's like, her raison d'etre was manifestly rejected by markets and polling.
I am praying for this Tory member to get the counter-argument right.
That will always be the problem for Liz, and I imagine it's very frustrating, right? She does feel like she has a lot to offer.
Nope, just gonna agree. My God. Even the Tory membership that are fans of Liz Truss don't understand what she did. Again, it's a politics of vibes. They'll have read the newspaper, seen, oh, Liz Truss must have overstepped the mark here, oh well, and moved on. But this is exactly why I make videos like this, to say no. You've been gaslit, and you've just accepted it, unfortunately. And because of that, it's no wonder that we keep losing, because you're not willing to actually challenge all of these journalists that are just lying to you. I once read Charles Moore of The Spectator say that Britain generally gets the governments it deserves, and I've come round to accepting that. Because the Brits, especially post-war, did feel that it was right to have, not a fully socialist, but certainly semi-socialist government, because, it's only fair, all these boys went to war and survived and went through the biggest horrors ever, therefore they deserve everything from the state. However, it then appears that that's just completely unsustainable, despite all the governments trying to do that, and then you end up with a Margaret Thatcher for 10 years, and then people clearly still wanted that by the time Blair came in, because he was absolutely neoliberal when he came in, at least that's what he campaigned on, and then he wins a second term, and all of a sudden you start getting this post-Keynesianism, and especially after the 2008 crash, they carry on with that, because people are thinking, wow, I don't want this recession, I really want to make sure that we don't have a budget deficit so that we're in debt constantly. Let's keep voting for austerity and not care about the cultural side of things, because effectively people want to keep their houses. And now we've ended up in an impasse where, again, we can't pay for any of this sort of thing. We've made the economy effectively stagnant and had to import millions of people over from the world to keep the GDP going up despite the GDP per capita line effectively staying straight and horizontal, until people realise that a huge problem we're having at the moment is this post-Keynesian economics that we have and immigration. I can't see it getting any better. And this is why we need a figure like Millet, not necessarily for Ancapistan in Britain, but certainly to just explain how all of this works. What's the issue with monopoly? Well, none if there is the availability of other companies to rise up from underneath them. What's the issue with taxes? Well, if you overtax people, then you actually end up with less revenue and therefore more economic inefficiency. We need someone effectively in Liz Truss's place, you know, on the right-hand side of the Tory government, and I've seen loads of people say, oh, she's not right-wing. No, economically she definitely is. Culturally, she's on the normie side of things of, oh, who cares about gay marriage? But anyway, we need someone there to effectively give out this alternative story to the right of the Tory party, and then you'll instantly start seeing things improve. But again, they're stuck on, oh, blame Whitehall, oh, blame these lefty institutions, and people just aren't buying it, because in people's minds, it's still Parliament and the government in charge. No. I mean, it's the civil service in charge. They're still technically the government. But Liz Truss is right to go on about all these quangos, these governmental organisations that have devolved powers, because they are really easy to take over for leftists and the wokerati, if you will, and you can easily go on about that, but all she seemed to say is devolution is bad. But you need to give a bit more of an explanation about that, and that's what we're missing in the UK at the moment. Someone to explain, actually, in more simple terms, why everything's going wrong and how they can fix it.
I get the sense it's sort of like a man on his deathbed, sort of looking back at his life and thinking, oh, we should have done this, should have done that, I've got all these regrets. Actually, these sort of groups, they're great at offering problems, the lists of problems, but they very rarely actually turn around and go, hang on, you know, we've had 14 years to sort, you know, the growth of bureaucrats and quangos and left-wing civil servants, and who signed us up to all these international agreements like COP, who voted for them, you know, and none of that happens.
I mean, this is, of course, another issue. If you're going to blame it on Whitehall, make it clear that actually the government doesn't have that much power. The problem is that you are effectively, you look like you're outsourcing your own problem there. Saying that after you've been in power for 13 years, oh, actually it was those people, then you just look useless, effectively. And this is especially most right-wing people's issue when it comes to the Tories. They do look useless, because they are useless, because they didn't have the backbone to fight back against this sort of thing. This is why Boris Johnson looked good, because he was clearly fighting against the hordes of Remainers that are in positions of power. And he managed to get it through, and now it's been a few years. The only people that really care to talk about the EU are absolutely insane people on Twitter. Everyone else doesn't really care. And if someone brings it up in conversation, a lot of right-wingers are actually quite quick at saying, actually, there's a lot of big economies in Europe that are doing worse than us. So as far as I'm concerned, that argument's been gone and done, like Brexit won. But this is the problem, Boris Johnson got in on Brexit. And now that the issue's over and no one cares, well, it's probably going to be immigration next. I can't see being anti-socialist being the next one, but one day, hopefully, it will be.
And the problem is, the more and more Tory MPs list all the things that are going wrong, the public go, we absolutely agree with you, so we're not going to vote for you, right?
I mean, yeah, as I say, I need a damn good reason to vote for them. And honestly, kicking out Rishi Sunak and putting either Liz Truss or Kemi Badenoch in is probably for the best. Certainly the best chance of getting me to vote for them, but that's not going to happen, so unless my MP or my candidate, I should say, happens to be the most based person on earth, I can't see how I'm going to vote for them, and I just vote Reform out of protest. And if I get told, well, that's going to guarantee a Labour government that's going to be worse than the Tories, then my only retort will be, well, the Tories should have adapted quicker then, shouldn't they?
The Conservatives are in freefall, 14 years down the pan. And if they are to pose any fight in the next election, they do need to come up with some good ideas. They should look anywhere else, though.
It's quite interesting after all those Vox Pops that they concluded on, oh, they need to look elsewhere for the ideas, because actually quite a lot of people there at the Vox Pop were saying, no, Liz Truss does actually have good ideas. They were effectively trying to say, without saying it because it's embarrassing to say on camera, that I want Liz Truss back. I mean, I'd be fine with it because I have absolutely no sense of social shame, but these people are quite desperate for literally anyone who looks like they have a backbone to fight Whitehall, because I think a lot of people do implicitly understand that the Tory party isn't really going to the right wing because they don't want the right wing in power in both Whitehall and within the Tory party itself. Because, again, how can what happened to Liz Truss be anything else? It was the complete rejection of Liz Truss by the powers that be, effectively. Leftist Tory MPs, they were the one handing in the votes of no confidence. Bank of England kept important information about the large parts of the UK economy before putting out the mini-budget. There didn't even seem to be a chance to let her U-turn some of the announcements, or even say, we're not going to do that, we're going to take it away and readjust it, and then come back with a better plan. They didn't even give them that chance. You know, the government just said, here's our plan, oh god, we're going to U-turn on a few things, oh god, get Jeremy Hunt in. Because I guarantee to you, that was not Liz Truss's choice. But effectively, there was a coup before everyone's eyes, and that was within the Tory party, but for some reason, these people that aren't going to have seats in a few months' time are deciding not to tell that to everyone, that the Tory party was the one that ousted Liz Truss, because it's completely infested with either completely uninterested politicians that are just there for the paycheck, or wet leftists. That's all they had to say, but they couldn't say it. So, as I say, until the Tory party, for lack of a better term, get more based, actually have a coherent message and plan for getting rid of all these ills of the leftist infestation of Britain, I guess you could call it, I'm not going to vote for them. I'll just vote for reform, because what other choice do I have? Anyway, that's everything I had for you today, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.